Guys, welcome to Real Talk. Good morning. Thank you kindly for joining us. My name is Jerry Miller. It's a pleasure to connect with you guys through the I Love CVille Network. We are live across Charlottesville, Central Virginia, the Commonwealth, and the world. The power of Facebook and social media used for good purposes. Today's show, a 2-hour bonanza. We're going to spotlight the Democratic Council ticket. Lloyd Snook, Payne, Sena Magill, 3 that have done some pretty impressive work so far. We're going to update them, update you on their platform and campaign. We're going to focus on affordable housing and a healthy housing system here on Real Talk, an insider's guide to real estate, powered by Roy Wheeler and the Yes Team. Judah Wickhauer is our director. Judah, why don't we go to the studio cam, which is the camera in the back. Everyone is now on camera now. First, good morning to everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Keith, you've assembled a pretty impressive panel this morning.
Well, they're definitely impressive, and I just want to thank everybody for taking time out in their busy campaign schedules, their busy lives. Some surgery that happened on Wednesday.
It's coming up on
I
Wednesday.
Apologize. That's what I get for not paying
that's on
attention.
the DL.
But I'm excited. I'm feeling great. I got an opportunity to FaceTime my beautiful grandson and wife who's up in Connecticut. So I'm ready to rock and roll and make some magic happen.
Fantastic. Why don't we go ladies first? And we'll start with Sena, and we'll slide that mic arm over Keith Smith for her. And Sena Magill, your third rodeo here
it is.
at I Love CVille. Mm-hmm. How's everything going? Give us the update.
The summer's always a little bit slower. People are kind of out of town a lot with kids and visiting. But we had a great kind of joint kickoff event showing that we're with the Democratic Party on last Sunday. We've already started canvassing. We're also canvassing individually as well as together, just to bring about the Democratic ticket to Charlottesville.
Clay, DeMont, Lauder, yay Sena, yay Lloyd. Kim and Clay Lauder, applaud you both. Susan Cohn-Scott backing you, even though I can't vote in Virginia. I appreciate that, but I'm not sure how that's going to work. Michael
Susan's been a friend for a long time.
I know she has. Put your comments in the comment section. We'll relay to everybody. Michael Payne, I think this is your 5th rodeo. How are things going for you, sir?
Good. Continuing to campaign over the summer, just getting out to as many different events as possible and continuing to be out talking to people, hear what people's concerns are, and continuing to, move forward with the issues talked about and campaigned on in the primary. And I think we're in a good position to be able to really take action on things like creating a regional transit authority, updating neighborhood development services in our zoning, taking local action on climate change, and really making some significant positive impact in the city of Charlottesville.
Lloyd Snook, 5th rodeo for you. Welcome FBC 29 and the Daily Progress to the show. Let's put in perspective what is going on in your world, sir.
Well, on June 11th, we had the primary. Finally, the last returns came in about 10 o'clock at night. And in about 30 hours after that, I was on a plane to Las Vegas to spend a month trying a case out there. So I got a forced break from politics this summer. And so now we're back. All of us still have some individual campaign materials that we have to use up from the primary. So we'll be out there with our own stuff.
This weekend.
Together. That's right, on Saturday. And I was out last weekend as well. And so, I have actually found knocking on doors, people think, oh my God, how boring could that be? How dreary. It's really
love
great.
it.
I love it because, first of all, I like meeting people. Second, because I get to hear from them without a filter what's of concern to them. And there are things that come up that I would never have thought were important issues. I had no idea, for example, until I canvassed in this particular neighborhood, how many people were so furious about the traffic light at Rugby Avenue and Rose Hill Drive. It's one of those things that, hey, I'm in Greenbrier, I'm a mile and a half away, I don't know these things, but only by going out to the neighborhoods do you find it out. So we found between the 3 of us that during the primary campaign, we started off with our own little stump speeches, and our stump speeches would talk about different things. And after about well, let's face it, there were 15 forums that I counted. After about the 7th or 8th, our themes began to coalesce around a few things. And I noticed that Sena stole a few of my ideas, and I stole a few of her ideas, and a few of Michael's ideas. So I get some sense of encouragement from the fact that we at least seem to be listening to each other.
Give it a like and a share on any of the streams you're watching. Keith, we're going to get you in the mix here. A lot of folks watching, a lot of comments coming in. Elizabeth Cromwell, CEO of the Chambers, watching now. One of your competitors, Bellamy Brown, is tuned into the program as we speak. 4 real estate firms watching the program. David Toscano's camp tuning into the show right now. Keith Smith, jump in here, sir.
So the first thing that popped in my head as everybody was speaking, the folks that were a little bit north of 50 have notepads, right? The people that are a little south of 50.
I'm well south of 50.
Have iPads and phones and stuff like that. And I'm kind of a hybrid. I got a little bit of both. So those who have never watched the show, we focus on housing here. And what I really want to try to get into to a term that I coined called the healthy housing system and affordable housing and how all that comes together. Basically, I'm thinking just kind of a roundtable discussion, and we'll start with the young lady to my left. So I noticed looking at your iPad, you have the report that was given out by the Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission, which I happen to be a commission member for the last 10 years. So thank you for looking at that.
I first want to thank Michael Payne.
Make sure you slide that arm over.
Oh.
The mic
sorry.
carbs.
Sorry.
Yes, the mic
I want
carbs.
to
Already
officially
failed.
thank Michael for making sure that we had this today before coming. I had seen these before in the past. I just had not seen this particular one yet, or I hadn't been able to study it. Anyways, so yes.
So I should move over to somebody else.
No,
It's an infographic. It's fantastic.
It doesn't take.
So before you get into that, I have to give a little bit of shout out.
Okay.
Oh, this is going to be
Yes,
fun.
this is how it
I
is.
just wanted to make sure Michael got credit.
Thank you, Michael. I have to give a shout out to Christine Jacobs at the Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission and those team over there. They did a wonderful job on putting this infographic together. It was a suggestion that we gave out that it would be a simple, multi-page document that one can look at and learn from.
Let's get into nitty-gritty with this question. Sena, what makes a healthy housing system in your opinion? There's a good question to start.
A healthy housing system means the actual opportunity for home ownership and housing security for all people in our city. We have to be able to hope and dream. And if you can't, the American dream has been founded in home ownership for generations. And if that's so beyond 60% of our people in our city, you start getting like a gestalt depression. How are you supposed, unless you have these things to dream for and to achieve forward, why do you care? Again, my background is in psychology, mental health, and that's where I come from on a lot of things. And understanding that underlying tensions and what's causing that citywide kind of mental health issues. And if you look at something called Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yes.
Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the base of the pyramid is shelter and food. Without secure shelter and food sources, you can't achieve anything else in your life. You can't achieve happiness, you can't achieve procreation, you can't achieve becoming a better person, because all you're trying to do is be an ant and survive. And so we need to make sure that shelter and food, we've also got food deserts in Charlottesville, believe it or not. A lot of people don't know this, and Chantel Bingham and a lot of other people are doing great work in this area.
Once just south of the downtown mall.
I'm sorry?
Once just south of the downtown mall, a food desert.
Yeah. A food desert is a place where if you don't have a vehicle, you can't get access to affordable, healthy food. And with our current transit system in particular, it's difficult for that. And I'm not trying to throw our transit system under the bus or anything.
Sure.
Oh, that was not intentional.
Unintended, Sena.
Good metaphor.
But we do need a lot of work. And talking to people who work in the transit authority, they acknowledge we need a lot of work there. So they're trying with what they have. And it's got to be one of our priorities, along with looking in inventive ways and multiple different types of ways to address our affordable housing crisis.
Heather Hill, welcome to the program. Dave Norris, thank you kindly for joining us. You want to throw the same question to the gentleman?
I think that's what we need to do.
Michael Payne, healthy housing system, and then we get into the nitty-gritty.
Yeah, I think, part of it to me is that in order to meet our housing needs, we're going to need a diverse array of different policies, a diverse array of different housing types, and we can't expect that there's going to be one housing policy or one housing type that's going to meet all of our needs. To get to that healthy housing ecosystem, we need rentals, we need homeownership, we need nonprofits, we need public housing, we need community land trusts, we need accessory dwelling units, we need studio apartments, we need 1 to 2 bedrooms, on and on and on. And our challenge is, how do we figure out holistically as a whole across the entire city, how do we meet the different housing needs that different people have at different points in their lives, and make sure that, and a big part of it for me is trying to create housing strategies where you're creating a housing ecosystem that has a ladder of home opportunity in terms of folks who are renting or in public housing can have opportunities to become homeowners through a community land trust or Habitat or other nonprofits, and providing, continual opportunities for people to build wealth. So that's, there's a lot in there, with what we need to do in housing, across the city. But, at a big picture level, that's a lot of it for me.
Well, we're going to spend 2 hours tearing into this.
Yeah, a lot of questions coming in right now. We will get to your questions. Let's allow Lloyd Snook some perspective here.
Well, I guess the perspective that I would offer is, and Sena comes at it from a psychology standpoint, although I was an economics major in college, although I don't claim to be an economist, but I do have one overall sense out of all of my study of economics and urban economics, which is that we have to be careful that we don't try to get too fine in our calculations, that we don't try to sit there and say, okay, this is exactly the one thing that will work because it worked someplace else. Every place is different. Charlottesville is different from every other place. So to me, I have a much vaguer sense, and that is, I don't want things to get too far out of whack. I can't be any more precise than that. We have had times in Charlottesville's history where we had more than 50% home ownership. I remember back in the 1980s, we had a goal of trying to get back to 50% home ownership in a true urban environment. And we have to acknowledge that we are really not a suburb at this point. We've got urban problems. In a true urban environment, you won't get to 50% home ownership. That doesn't mean that everybody can't aspire to it, and that everybody can't have it as a goal that they're working toward, which is sort of the psychology issue that Sena touched on. But let's not get too hung up if we only get to 40%.
Keith Smith.
So last Friday, I spent the whole day as the chair of the Regional Housing Partnership. We had 24 elected officials, private sector, executive level UVA folks at the table, and we spent 8 hours. We brought in a consultant out of Richmond to help us with a strategic plan on how to actually, as a regional housing authority, or partnership, I should say, to attack some of these particular issues. So it was interesting because when I went through there, my goal was just to come up with 3 high-level bullet points. We actually ended up with 6, which was awesome. And then was even more awesome, we had 24 people start at 9 o'clock, and we had 24 people end at 5 o'clock. So those who have ever done that, that's just a feat in itself to go ahead and do this. But they came up with this phrase. This was at everybody's collaborative phase. The housing authority exists to collaborate to ensure, influence, inspire, access to healthy housing for all. So it sounds like where we gravitated after 8 hours is almost what we're talking about. So I'm excited about that opportunity that without us prepping for something, we as 24 folks came to the same level. So I'm going to dig into some of the details in that conversation and kind of throw it out that way. And the second thing that gravitated to the top was red tape. there's levels of frustration in the affordable housing space to produce product. I sit on the Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission as well as the Thomas Jefferson Community Land Trust. And to be straight up, what can you three folks do once you get, assuming it happens, get in the seat to help reduce this path? It took us 4 years from the time that the city, we asked for the money from the city to get to this point. And that's just way too long. So we'll start with the young lady since I am, would you prefer me to start across the table?
Yeah, let's start switching it around.
All righty. So Michael.
Well, I think a major part of it is improving the capacity of neighborhood development services. I think a lot of developers, both in the private and nonprofit sphere, encounter the challenge of the approval process just taking so long, and there being so many different veto points along the path from originating the idea of a project and getting the financing together to build out, that a lot of projects end up taking on a ton of additional cost, which reduces the ability to make the unit affordable. It can prevent some affordable housing projects from even being able to come together. And so the city's done an efficiency study of neighborhood development services, which had a number of recommendations, and I think we can work with the city manager to try and implement those recommendations and just, again, improve the capacity of neighborhood development services so they can be more proactive and handle these requests in a more efficient way. Because I think right now, with the development boom in Charlottesville, neighborhood development services is, a lot of times just trying to catch up with things as they come in, and we haven't invested enough in them to allow them to have the capacity to do long-range planning and not just be in crisis management mode constantly. That's a piece of it. Along with that, finishing our comprehensive plan and accompanying that with rewriting our zoning to match the comprehensive plan. Right now, a big part of it is that our zoning code, particularly with how it defines density and density limits and developments, really incentivizes developers to build commercial single-family homes, and that's it. And we know from all our housing studies that that's exactly the kind of development, at least when it comes to housing, that we need the least of. And so I think our zoning creates a lot of problems for developers who are trying to build things like smaller apartments or micro units or duplexes, and that hinders a lot. A developer can look at, I can build something by right, or I could build the kind of housing type we need, but if I build that housing type, I'm going to need to go before the city for a special use permit and a rezoning request.
Flint Hill is a perfect example of that.
There's a lot of different examples, and there's developers who are going to look at that and look at the history of past developments and say, am I going to risk thousands of dollars, years of time, and at the end of it have no guarantee that I'm going to be able to even build this project out? And so I think those are some of the things we need to take action on.
Keith Woodard's project, a perfect example of that. Oftentimes, perfection is the enemy of good. Instead of just taking what's on the table, where we're going to bring X amount of affordable housing units, perhaps council's pushing for even more, and that just leads the developer to just say, you know what, I'm just going to do it what's on the table by zone.
Well, in fact, Keith's experience is not unique to Keith. I was talking with Dan Rosenzweig at Habitat for Humanity, who said they figured out that over the last few years, the various delays and additional not required expenses imposed by neighborhood development services on Habitat projects cost Habitat more than $1 million. That's $1 million of charity money had to be raised by somebody, and that's money that got, in many cases, frittered away or spent on things that didn't need to be spent on.
Opportunity cost.
Opportunity cost. And I'm not even talking about opportunity cost or the cost of money. I'm just talking flat out
effort.
Dollars spent.
Right.
And dollars perhaps wasted, or dollars not required, dollars that didn't have to be spent to get to the result that we wanted. So, I started my campaign saying that I wanted to get the city government working right again. And that, some people focused on different parts of the message. I focused from the very beginning on this problem in neighborhood development services, but not only neighborhood development services, of just getting decisions made in a forthright manner where people have an expectation that it's going to happen. And I remember when I was on the Planning Commission in the 1980s, we had a reputation that we worked hard to get of, you came to us with a product proposal, we gave you an answer. And it might be a no, but it would be a quick no, and not a 6 months worth of back and forth and reconsideration before we worry you to death kind of a no. And I had one case where somebody said, a developer came up to me after a planning commission meeting where we had turned him down, and he said, I appreciate the fact that you gave us a quick no and you told us why, and then we could go back and fix the proposal and come back with something that complied with what people wanted. One of the problems that people tell me right now is they don't know, and under the current code,
the process.
Well, it's not the process. They don't know substantively what's going to be demanded of them until they get into the middle of it. And then it's awkward, at least, to try to get the thing fixed. And so as we tweak the zoning code, there may be some tweaks in there that we can get to where people have a greater sense of expectation going in, saying, I know when I go in, this is what I'm going to have to do. I can make my calculations up front, whether this is something I want to do or not, rather than, as in Keith's case, he has an $80 million project, I think it was, and Neighborhood Development Services kept adding additional requirements that cost him $1.5 million that are sunk in the ground. And he finally said, I'm walking away because I can't make money given the other circumstances here. So that's a situation where, for requirements that weren't even legal requirements, but they were being held up as things that were being required by council to get some additional permit or something. This project that, frankly, at this point could be generating close to maybe $800,000 a year in tax revenues, we're not getting. Right. And the building isn't being built, and the city market doesn't have a permanent home, and all in large part because during the 1.5 to 2 years that this project got delayed, it got worried to death, market conditions changed in the meantime, and so finally it didn't make any sense. That's the kind of red tape situation that I really think we ought to get back to the reputation from 30 years ago of, we're going to act on your proposal quickly and fairly and honestly and under the law.
Keith he's referencing is Keith Woodard, whose project was kiboshed on Water Street. Not this Keith,
yes.
Keith Woodard. Elizabeth Snook says, hi, Dad. From your 40th class reunion at Michigan, some of your classmates saw my name tag and insisted that I say hello on the live podcast.
My daughter is working at the law school that my wife and I graduated from 40 years ago.
You now have the CVille Weekly watching the program, 3 media outlets watching the show. Sena Magill, your thoughts?
Can we repeat the question?
You know where we're going here.
No, seriously. I was paying so much attention to what everyone else was saying.
Well, give her the question again.
So the basic question is, how can we reduce red tape? And it boiled down version.
Streamline the process.
Well, I mean, both Michael and Lloyd make incredibly good points on this. You reduce red tape by looking through how much of the red tape is really still necessary. Go back to mental health, which I have been spending a lot of time this last year learning a lot about zoning code, learning a lot about neighborhood development services and planning. But again, it's not something that I have spent years learning like both Michael and Lloyd have. But going back to mental health, as time has gone on, when I worked at Region 10, we got a lot from Medicaid. Most of our dollars came from Medicaid. Towards the end of my career in Region 10, I swear a third of my time was spent justifying my time in red tape to clients. Putting that kind of burden on a developer or whether it's a nonprofit development, whether it's a for-profit development, of justifying these weird intricacies that they take away from money from making the project work. We want to streamline we want to streamline nonprofit projects because we want them to be able to put as much money into the actual building of the project, making it a good environment, versus having to build extra site plans, or not build, engage extra site plans, purchase more drawings and renderings than are necessary. I'd rather them put that money into community engagement, getting their local communities involved in what they want this to look like, than red tape from neighborhood development services. I think that's where we've had some disconnect. We have put more emphasis over the years into the bureaucratic city process of making things happen than we have and the time involved in making that happen, than into community engagement and getting people's ideas and thoughts and process of the people who are actually living in the communities. And this goes not just with the nonprofits, but also for-profit development as well. I mean, everyone has a buy right, but let's make it affordable for our local small developers to get involved. Developers who are also going to pay a living wage, who aren't going to be wage theft, aren't going to engage in wage theft from their employees, who are going to be taking, I'm a firm believer in small companies. I think and this comes to the building as well. So many times we have to farm out to large companies that aren't even from Virginia who ship in people. And that has to do with General Assembly stuff, and I know I'm going all over the place, but General Assembly does come into some of this. And the Dillon Rule, and I'm going to bring the first Dillon Rule up here. Yeah. But, and, RFP, oh, I'm not, I can't read your handwriting. In our RFP process, we have to take like the least affordable. We need to start trying to get ways that we can have guarantees that small companies, minority, women-owned businesses, that local companies have an edge over in these RFP processes. And this is all part of that red tape piece. And I know, like I said, I'm going all over the place, and it's not quite as comprehensive and straightforward as Michael's or Lloyd's.
But I think you got there.
Thank you. I'm a circular thinker.
If I could add one thing I want to make clear is that I don't think all of us have talked a little bit about streamlining the process, but we don't want to streamline the public input out of the process, and that's an important point to make. The experience we had back in the 80s was we got all of the government entities into the same meeting. We got them all to say in that meeting, here are the problems we have with the project. Everybody came to the table at one time. The problems either got solved or they didn't get solved at one time, and then the developer could move forward.
So I'm going to chime in. I'm the guy on the other side of the table that's doing this stuff, either professionally or through nonprofits. And the right answer, we just all had. So Michael's 100% right. NDS is understaffed. Overworked, understaffed. I deal with it every day. There's just no way that they can perform at the level that's required to perform. So that needs, in my opinion, to be fixed. Lloyd's 110% correct, because in our bullet points, top three, number 3 was a 21-day turnaround time, right? So other jurisdictions within Flavanna, for instance, does it. You submit an application, you get an answer in 21 days. We're moving forward or we're not moving forward. And that's really, at the end of the day, what the nonprofit developer wants, the for-profit developer wants, everybody wants. Are we moving forward or are we not? Oh, these boxes do we have to check? You're 100% correct, because Dillon Rule, as you read my notes, is problematic in this process, because the state just changed the proffer rules, which now hand ties the local jurisdictions to request things. I'd like to dig in a little deeper, because I did a poor job of asking the question. Where our struggle with the land trust is post-approval. We're in the process of constructing, and there are changes the city's hitting us with that we were not prepared to pay for, which are now making the project delayed by almost a year, and now costing $15,000 higher than we originally wanted to charge. We wanted to charge $199. Now we're at $215. We had to absorb, to go to Lloyd's point, we had to absorb it. We're not a for-profit. We don't have a markup. We're a light and lean organization. The other part of it is we now, because we had to jump that, we missed a down payment pool. So the city has a down payment pool up to $200,000, and if Greg Slater is watching,
He is watching.
He'll correct me, I'm sure, my chairman. But now, Greg, God love him, spent hundreds of hours pivoting to PHA and other sources to get this down payment assistance, because we needed to pay an extra $15,000 because there was undue delay. So I don't know if we're going to have a magic answer to that. I think Michael's answer is a good answer, that maybe they're short-staffed on it. But I just kind of wanted to throw that thought out. Whoever wanted to jump in and respond, maybe Michael, if you don't mind. What your thoughts are on that?
There's a good comparison to be made between Charlottesville and Albemarle County in terms of how the two local governments handle zoning enforcement and carrying out their zoning regulations. And I think Albemarle County's staff has just, the county has been able to make an investment that allows the county staff to do that more efficiently. And again, I really do think a lot of it comes down to neighborhood development services being short-staffed and needing to be improved in that way, so that developers are able to engage with a department that's proactive, that's able to be clear in terms of what expectations are, and interface closely with development as it's happening, as well as enforce zoning regulations after the fact, and that's key, because otherwise when you're unclear about what expectations are, or you're not able to get a quick response. As Keith mentioned, in the affordable housing world, getting the finances together on a project is really hard. They come from a lot of different sources with a lot of different deadlines and a lot of different reporting requirements. And if you are held up in a process and a couple of those pieces start to fall off, all of a sudden the financing cannot work out. Or, as you mentioned, the nonprofit has to absorb the cost, or it just ends up being a little less affordable than it could have. And that's, as a city, that's just an own goal, and that we can, that doesn't need to be the case, especially with how much Charlottesville is growing and how much development we have. We need to have a neighborhood development services department that can handle that.
Two follow-ups on that. First question, very quick one. Did Jim Tolbert's position ever get filled?
Isn't that Mr. Ikefuna?
Tolbert's position. I'll research that. Next question.
The answer is yes.
Okay.
I just can't remember who it is.
Okay, Greg Slater, your chairman, just chimed in. Neighborhood Development Services has not only caused added expenses for the Thomas Jefferson Community Land Trust, they have caused price increases and are on the cusp of causing distress to our purchasers' lives due to the inability for us to deliver homes we are building on a reasonable and predictable timeline. Lloyd Snook.
Well, and during 2017 and 2018, the city had commissioned a number of efficiency studies. One of them came out with a list of 83 different things in citywide management issues that needed to be addressed. There was a separate follow-on to that specifically for NDS that listed 8 very specific things in NDS that needed to be addressed. There was also the Housing Task Force study that came out in April of 2018 that identified problems at NDS, and I think they referred to a lack of managerial capacity at NDS. Now that could mean either you've got the wrong people in charge or you don't have enough people, but either way, there's a real problem there. I've talked to Teron Richardson about it. He's well aware of the issues. He's well aware of the problems. I certainly am not in a position to say what he thinks he's going to do going forward, but I will predict that there will be some action on that before we get to an election.
And I'll just chime in quickly. I think the issue of NDS is the only issue during the campaign and talking to folks where this is an issue where for-profit developers, nonprofit developers, the Housing Authority, the Public Housing Association of Residents, the Charlottesville Low-Income Housing Coalition, everyone was on the exact same page, that
including the developers and the realtors.
Right, that's what I'm saying. For-profit developers and realtors and CAR and other groups, they're all on the exact same page that our interface with neighborhood development services isn't working. And if you have all those groups on the same page, something as big is wrong.
I will totally concur with that because I found the same thing knocking on doors. I didn't find a single person who said neighborhood development services was working efficiently. And I don't want to blame the staff of neighborhood development services on this. This is, I think, a much bigger problem than any individual staff. I think it is a lot to do with not being able to have enough staff there, having not hired enough staff. We haven't had a full-time city manager for, what, a year now? And we've had lots of issues come up that we've been dealing with that were on fire. Neighborhood development services has been a smoldering issue that has been getting bigger and bigger as we grow as a city in density or in people. And we do need to increase our density. We need to be thinking how we're going to increase that in a way that is streamlined so that projects that depend on LIHTC credits, projects that depend on federal, state, and local grant systems or other grants that they can pull in or other investors coming in will buy into the project. And that's how we're also going to get innovative technology and innovative projects that are different, that aren't just the same old, that are looking at how we can bring together truly affordable housing. I grew up on a land trust, actually. It was one of the only ones at the time in Virginia, and there was a lot of issues with it back in the 70s that have since been resolved now so that they're much easier. But there's already some difficulties there getting people around the idea of a land trust. We don't want to make it even more expensive and more difficult because that is one of the ways that we can truly keep houses affordable permanently.
Keith, I got a lot of questions we got to get to from the audience.
I'm just going to make one comment, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I've been doing this since 1987, not quite as long as Lloyd. I've been working with elected officials for all the 6 jurisdictions to get multi-unit projects approved on it, and the New Yorker's going to come out at me, I'm going to be very direct.
I like that.
The city council is the leaders. The city council is the one that can fix this problem at NDS, not the county, not the town's city manager. The leadership has to come from the city council down. You're talking to everybody's saying NDS is the problem, NDS is understaffed. You as city councilors, are you willing to make a commitment here today when you get elected to make this your #1 priority to provide the leadership that is required for staff to make this step forward? Because I'll tell you, without you guys, it's just not going to happen.
Well, and let me say,
Nice.
we don't have the power.
Sure
City
you do.
council,
Sure
no,
you
we
do.
don't.
Yeah.
City manager hires and fires.
Sure.
We don't hire and fire NDS directors. But what we can say and should say, and I don't think we have to say, given current tenor, is that there got to be changes. #1, #2, we've got to have some more money to put into this. That is something we do. We do write the check. We do say there should be more employees at NDS to deal with the underfunding issue, however you want to characterize the lack of managerial capacity issue. But we also, of course, we have the right and the power to set expectations.
You provide the leadership, period.
To provide leadership, but I don't want anybody to think that if I agree with your proposition that I am agreeing that we're going to micromanage NDS.
I didn't say micromanage, I said lead. 2 very different words.
Okay. Or even that we'll manage NDS. We won't.
Well, I do this
We
all
can
over.
lead, but we can't manage.
Well, I would
Payne
say,
wants to jump in here.
I remember the very first candidates form we had. Each candidate got to submit a question. The question I submitted was about neighborhood development services and how are we going to implement the recommendations from the efficiency study. So from the beginning of my campaign, this has been a top priority, and I think, I would definitely like to get to a place and be proactive about getting to a place where at least 3 city councilors are giving a clear directive to the city manager that we need to implement at a minimum the recommendations from the efficiency study, because again, it's a foundational issue when it comes to nonprofit housing development, the housing authority, for-profit development, rewriting our zoning, finishing the comprehensive plan. And if you don't have those foundational issues fixed, you're not going to get to the next level of implementing policy change effectively.
We've talked some broad strokes. Maybe we go a little bit more micro in certain aspects of the city. Let's take 10th and Page. Okay? We've had numerous people on this program, on this network, from 10th and Page, grew up in 10th and Page. And this is what the neighborhood is saying. There are towers of apartments that are engulfing the neighborhood. 10th Street, historically an African-American neighborhood, is now an epicenter of $400,000 and $500,000 homes. Dairy Market, and the developer, Chris Henry, is watching right now, of Dairy Market and Dairy Central, is about to come to market in 2020. And Dairy Market and Dairy Central are going to put high dollar, high price tag living situations, restaurants, tap room, Star Hill, 19 restaurants, and literally change that corridor even more. Let's take the 10th and Page neighborhood, throw this to you, Lloyd. Okay? I'm seeing a future for 10th and Page where in a historically African-American neighborhood, the residents are about to be priced out of the neighborhood. If it hasn't already happened.
It has already happened.
Already happened.
And, you know, it started happening back in the 1980s most clearly, which is one of the reasons why in the 1980s we had this task force to address home ownership. What should we do to maintain home ownership ratios? It ultimately led us to create the first draft that I helped create before I got off the Planning Commission would have limited the R1 zone. It would extend it change a lot of places from R2 to R1 zone right in the area of 10th and Page and Fifeville, specifically to protect the African American families that had been there for such a long time, to protect them from speculators and flippers. It wound up by 1991 getting extended citywide, and that's how we get to the point where we've got more than half of our land zoned R1
for a single family,
which is nuts.
Yeah, it is nuts.
But it was a citywide expansion of a concern that we had that was very specifically directed to 10th and Page. So the issue right now, and what happened in the long run was the 10th and Page, in fact, went to more and more, mommy and daddy lived there for 25 years, 50 years. They die. Their house is now put on the market. The son, daughter who don't live there say, hey, I can sell this house for $250,000. That's my chance to build wealth for the family. So on the one hand, every time you talk about gentrification, you say, gee, poor people are being forced out of the market. On the other hand, what you're also seeing is that poor people are now getting a nest egg that they didn't otherwise have. I've got clients for whom I've written wills and so on who have said, okay, mom sold her house on 10th Street or the estate sold her house on 10th Street. Now I've got a chunk of money that I never thought I was going to have. They have wealth now. So every time you look at it as a bad thing, there's also a corresponding good thing. And nothing is as simple as everything is all bad or everything is all good. Now, the specific thing that's different this time around about 10th and Page is that we're now talking, first of all, we're talking about the other end of 10th Street. We're not just talking about 10th Street down by the university. And second, we're talking about a greater degree of commercial development than was ever being discussed. And the third thing that's a little bit different, of course, is going back years ago, we didn't have the 5- and 6-story buildings, apartments on University or on West Main that were literally blocking the sun from much of West Haven and 10th Street. And so that's a psychic thing as much as an economic thing. The economic piece of it is very good in the sense that it provides a place for students to live not in a single-family house dispossessing mom and dad. But the bad thing is it's this looming thing out up there that just depresses everybody that's looking at it. That's a failure from a sort of a building code / zoning code perspective. It's unfortunately not something we can fix now because it's done. Now, can we do something to make sure that the new developments that are going to be coming on the 600 block and the 800 block of West Main Street, that they don't have the same issues? There's some discussions underway of tweaks to the zoning code and so on that might be able to help on some of that. It's not going to help with the situation that's already there.
What are you thinking, Sena?
A couple things. I've got 5 things I'm trying to remember here.
Okay.
One, back to Keith's question on the leadership challenge on NDS. I am willing to take it. I won't get into the details on exactly how, but I am willing to say that is one of my top priorities. Affordable housing is one of my top priorities, and this is part of that. Back to 10th and Page. I live in 10th and Page. I have for 15 years now.
Nice.
I live 3 blocks from the towering infernos of...
So you see them?
Yes, I see them. Living in the neighborhood for the last 15 years, the things that I am seeing that cause gentrification, I mean, I was the only white person on my street when I moved to 10th and Page, and I was perfectly happy with that. This was just this neighborhood my children have been growing up in. My daughter, sorry, I don't have multiple children. My daughter's been growing up in. When I was at a meeting the other day, she got locked out of the house and just went knocking on doors until she found somebody was home. I've watched kids grow up there. They're watching my kid grow up. It's my neighbors together. I love it. One of the things I have seen that has been causing some of the family move out is a lot of the times people will sell their homes for a cash offer being offered. 10th and Page is being highly targeted by the I will buy your home for cash offers. And people are being under offered. Yeah. And this is, when I look up when I look up on the GIS, how much some of the houses have been sold for and then flipped for later, it makes me really sad. And we need to have a program that's going into the neighborhood, reminding people that if they are going to sell, they need to get with a realtor and they need to do it the way that other people do it as well, so that they are not taken advantage of and they get the most for their investment and their family's investment. That a cash offer isn't necessarily even as quick as a bank loan offer. There is nothing more to a cash offer. Another thing that I have seen that happens is a lot of the times a family will leave their home to 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 inheritors because they're trying to be fair to all their kids and their grandkids. But one person alone has the monetary resources to buy out the rest of their siblings. So we need to help, if somebody wants to keep a home in the family, we need to find a way to do a loan program to help people keep their homes in their families. This would be another way of actually meeting the real problem that's causing people to move out. A third reason that we see people, especially in the African American community, after spending a lot of time talking to neighbors and other people, is we don't have a lot of entertainment opportunities. A lot of people I know go to Richmond, D.C., Norfolk for music, for clubs. And so we need to be focusing on that as well, as to why are the young people who are becoming professionals not staying. And then the last piece I want to say, again, being in the 10th and Page neighborhood, Chris Henry with the Dairy Central Project came to our neighborhood association meetings.
He's watching now.
For a year and a half. He still comes to our neighborhood association meetings, even though he doesn't need anything from us, to check in. So if anybody ever wants to talk to him, he's been totally open. He took people from the neighborhood association on a tour of Dairy Central interior to show what was going on. Yes, it's a development that's going to bring changes to the neighborhood, whether or not we really, whether or not they're the changes we 100% want. I will say he has been a developer who has been trying his best to make as little impact on the neighborhood and to do whatever he can. And so I just want to put that out there, that he has made engagement almost like a gold standard of private developers that I have seen. So
Barry Sisson says Sena is very right that people are taken advantage of and selling their homes. The city could create resources for advice in this area. I think Yolanda Harrell and New Hill Development Corporation are doing a lot of that, trying to create an infrastructure of education where African American families can build generational wealth as opposed to chasing short-term paydays. Michael Payne has not offered perspective on this topic.
Well, there's no question that there's gentrification happening. As others have mentioned, you can see the developments in Derry Central and West Main Street, which on both ends are, sort of towering over the community and bringing in development that's more expensive. And that, the research in affordable housing shows that, if you bring in dense, expensive developments into a low-income community, maybe you build a really dense apartment complex where rents start at $1,500 or more a month, and maybe regionally that reduces rents by a small amount. But within that specific neighborhood, it will increase rents, displace people, and lead to a cycle of speculative investment, of people coming in, flipping homes, and making offers to buy in cash, and there's no question. I mean, we just see extensive gentrification in 10th and Page and other places in Charlottesville. I think some of the dynamics behind that, that we can influence on City Council is one, in terms of our zoning. Historically, we have left zoning that allows for denser development in low-income and particularly low-income African-American communities, and not included that density in other areas of the city. And we need to figure out a way to reverse that trend to get more density throughout the entire city, so we're not just pushing all of this intense development into only a few areas. And we can spread that demand out around more areas in the city, because in a lot of ways you're just seeing this pent-up demand expressed in this one small area, which is driving a lot of this dynamic. A second factor is, trying to, in areas where we know intense development could occur that could transform the community in a way that could create gentrification. I'm thinking particularly similar, look at like Cherry Avenue, which is just ripe for really intense development coming, over the next few years, trying to create small area plans for those areas so the community is able to have some input in terms of thinking about, what's our vision for what we want to see here? What are ways that we want to match zoning to get what we want in this area? And how can we try and get creative about thinking about strategies for community wealth building, which other cities around the country do, in terms of thinking about are there ways we can partner creatively with a community development corporation or a community land trust to try and keep, if new businesses open up, are there ways we can try and ensure that people who live in the neighborhood have an opportunity to open their business in that space, that we're opening restaurants or cultural, like Sena mentioned, clubs,
Yeah.
Music venues
Right.
that match what the people who live in that neighborhood want to see and want to spend their money at. Because I think a lot of what we see with gentrification is that cultural gentrification precedes the gentrification of housing, in
Totally
terms
true.
of you see expensive coffee shops or breweries, which, I don't have anything against them, but they might not match what that neighborhood actually wants.
There are
in
three
terms of
African American restaurants in the city of Charlottesville. One is Brown's Fried Chicken on Avon. One is Mel's Cafe, and one is the one that just opened on Cherry, Royalty Eats. There are three in what is arguably one of the most saturated restaurant markets in the entire country. That is a microcosm of the problem we have right there.
And I think, that's something that, again, other cities around the country have done, is thinking, how can we think about strategies for when investment comes into communities as much as possible, making sure the people who live in that community are able to benefit from that investment. And I think, there's a piece of the Derry Central development that I think matches that a little bit, is, at least if I'm remembering correctly, like Angelic's Kitchen
Yes.
is opening up as
From
one of the
food
businesses
trailer
there.
to a restaurant.
Right. It's those kind of things, when investment comes in, how can we have, everyone in the community benefit from it? Because too often what happens is if you bring in intense capital development in low-income areas, the people who actually live in that neighborhood end up not benefiting at all.
Right.
Their assessments go up. If they're renters, their rent goes up. And again, a lot of people are renters. They're not homeowners. 60% of the city are renters.
Belmont downtown is a perfect example of that.
and a third final piece of it, and this is a smaller piece, but it's something the city can take action on, is that when you bring in intense capital development to low-income areas, you're going to see assessments rise, you're going to see rents rise, and for people who are homeowners, even if they fully own their home, if they're living on Social Security or they're living on a fixed income, that increase from the assessments and their property taxes can make it harder to stay in their home and can put more pressure to sell their home from some of these investors who are coming in and making offers that are maybe below, what the house is even worth. And so the city can take action and the city has started to do this to their credit, but can continue to expand the real estate tax relief program for families, both in terms of the amount of that relief as well as the income thresholds for what families qualify for it. And that's I think a component of stopping some gentrification.
So I just looked at the phone. We're 1 hour in.
Yeah, it's great. It's going well.
Okay, I'd love
25 questions coming in. No, go ahead.
So that's exactly what I was just going to go to. I think it'd be appropriate at this time to try to ask some of the questions, maybe in a more rapid format.
100% agree with that.
Like 1 sentence, 2 sentence answers, and we'll just kind of roll around a little bit. I know Lloyd is
well, he's the attorney in him.
I'm a Yankee, so you can't shut me up. So
this is a good one right here, and this is from someone I follow closely. He's watching right now. He's a Twitter rock star. I think he's interacted with all you guys in some capacity. It's Matthew Gilligan. He's watching the show, and he chimes in, Matthew Gilligan, with, what will each of you do as a city councilor to make sure more households making below area median income can live in your neighborhood? In your neighborhood is the key. Why don't we put a little shot clock on here? We're sports fans here. Maybe a 30-second shot clock, and we'll fire some questions to you guys. In your neighborhood, Lloyd Snook.
My neighborhood in Greenbrier, if somebody's making less than AMI, that's not likely to be anything that's going to happen anytime soon, unless it's a situation where there can be an ADU in somebody's basement apartment, something like that.
Cottage.
A cottage in the back. I know of some of my friends who have done that. I talked to one person who said, I've been trying for a year to get NDS to approve my auxiliary dwelling unit, and I didn't want to get into the details of just what the issues were. There's somebody some credibility, and I assume some ability to navigate a system that clearly they found not adequate. We need to fix that.
Michael Payne, I got the shot clock time and sound machine.
I'll try and keep it to 30 seconds.
That's good.
I live in an accessory dwelling unit in Belmont, right near where the Sunrise Mobile Home Park used to be. It's a diverse community, and fortunately, I think there's some good examples right in that neighborhood of what we can do. The Sunrise Mobile Home Park, which was redeveloped by Habitat to be home ownership opportunities for the residents who live there, and we are right near the community land trust projects on Nassau Street. So ADUs, community land trust, nonprofit development right there.
Well, a lot of my neighborhood is below AMI. Until recently, my family was as well. And one of the things a lot of people don't talk about are the water issues in 10th and Page. There was some culvert stuff done that has caused a lot of issues with water in a lot of people's backyards, so ADUs are difficult. But from my perspective, ADUs are more about helping people keep their homes by providing a secondary income stream.
Yeah.
Which is very important. And I think that also means that we need to be looking at some sort of loan program or partnership, additionally with either Habitat or PHA, that helps people who are lower income build accessory dwelling units so that they can keep their homes and have a secondary income stream coming in. So again, families, generations can keep homes that is not necessarily attached to their credit, but attached to the land value. And also maybe as long as it is being a rental property, a long-term rental property, then also looking at giving an abatement on tax increase.
Nice.
So I just want to chime in a little bit on the ADU side of things. Auxiliary dwelling unit, I sit on the cohort. I was appointed by the city to do that, so we're doing a national cohort. Everything that we just talked about So on a positive thing, the city's in front of this. We have a pretty eclectic group of people from the private and the public sector, put on by Portland State University. We're attacking everything that we're talking about here to try to help bring that on and streamline the city's process a little bit. The other thing that we're talking about is increasing density in the R1S and the R1 to what Portland and Washington State, as Oregon has just did, where they are doing up to 4 units per single family. So we're looking at that. So that's from the positive side of things. So I just wanted to jump in real quick on that.
You get some props over here, Sena Magill. Another question coming in. We have a lot of questions coming in here. We're continuing with this rapid fire. This one is coming from Chris Henry, the developer behind Dairy Market and Dairy Central. Why don't we throw this to Michael Payne first? Gentlemen and Sena, would love to know why it is taking so long for the city to complete its long-range planning efforts, comprehensive plans, small area plans, zoning update, standards, and design manual. All of this has been, quote, in process, end quote, for over 5 years. Would love to see City Council and the new city manager make completing these tasks a priority. I think a lot of people would. MP, that's a very loaded question for you here.
Rapid fire?
Yes,
So,
please.
Well, I think, when it comes to the comprehensive plan, it was supposed to be finished over a year ago.
Right.
That was, the initial deadline, and it's been extended multiple times. So a lot of factors in that. I think part of it is that there's been a lot of turnover in terms of city staff, as well as a lot of turnover just on the planning commission in terms of terms ending and new people being appointed. A lot of a failure to do really thorough community engagement at the start, creating a lack of trust later on in the process, which forced them to go back and redo community engagement to get more input. Whereas if they had some of that input baked in at the beginning, maybe it could have moved along in a faster fashion. The comprehensive piece is one plan of it, and then comes the harder part, actually updating our zoning to comport with the comprehensive plan. I think a lot of that has to do with, again, as we discussed earlier, neighborhood development services, and the fact that we've had so much turnover in terms of city staff at the city manager level, assistant city manager level, that when you have that level of turnover, it's hard to do something as significant as rewrite your zoning.
Lloyd Snook.
On the zoning problem, there was, I think it was December of 2016, like a 17-page list of changes and fixes that were needed in the zoning code, and that's not even getting at different priorities. That's just fixing house cleaning kinds of things and things that don't make sense. And one of the things that has happened is that we have gotten so committed to the notion of reworking the comprehensive plan as it deals with density kinds of issues and so on, to reworking the zoning code to deal with these kinds of truly transformational changes, that we haven't even stuck to our knitting of getting the thing to work right in the short run. I'd like to see us get it done in the short run, and then let's turn to these broader issues. And then at least some of the things that are so annoying that developers run into when they say, this doesn't make any sense, and the NDS says, well, but that's what the code says. At least we get those fixed before we spend, we've spent years getting behind schedule because we want to get the perfect solution. Let's just get the good things fixed.
We've got a reporter from the Richmond Times-Dispatch watching right now, Sean Tubbs, your friend, also watching the program right now. Sena Magill.
Basically, I'm not sure how it got to be such a mess. I think it's probably just that we've had a lot of growth in our city, and bureaucracy tends to slow things down in general. And so when you have growth and then you pulling back, I just agree that we need to be really focusing on this and fixing it, and that this needs to be a priority, and I'll keep it short and sweet to the point.
Nice, Sena Magill. Keith Smith.
Don't let perfection get in the way of progress. Was that less than 30 seconds?
Yeah, that was really good. Don't let perfection get in the way of progress. We've gone an hour and change, and we have yet to really highlight the impact transportation, or the lack thereof, is having on our affordable housing crisis. I will say it for everybody so no one has to say it, we're not throwing public transportation under the bus here, okay? I said it, you guys don't have to say it. I stole that from you, Sena Magill. Public transportation is straight up, it's not robust enough. It has some unreliable tendencies to it. and it is impacting our most impoverished citizens the most. If we had better public transportation, not just in the city of Charlottesville, but in Central Virginia totality, folks could live in the outer counties, not worry about 45-minute commutes. They could live at shorter, more affordable housing in the outer counties and not sacrifice that money that they're saving by wear and tear of a vehicle or fuel expenses.
Or
Okay?
parking when you get there.
Or parking.
Or they could actually live in the city and get to their job.
Exactly. Public transportation, anywhere you want to go, Michael Payne.
I will not only not throw our public transit system under the bus, I want to shout out CAT. They have a really great staff and community of bus drivers and other folks. Their social, I love their social media presence. They got a new social media
He's watching.
manager. I love CAT. I really do. And they have a new executive director coming in who was involved with Richmond's public transit system, who I think is going to be able to do some really exciting things that are also starting to come together with the regional transit partnership. So I think everyone is on the same page of, trying to expand public transit. I view the regional transit partnership under the Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission as a first step to getting to a regional transit authority, which can bring together UVA, CAT, Jaunt, and Albemarle County. And that will really improve a lot. I'll just talk briefly about one component when it comes to housing is that a big part of rents going up in apartments, especially taller apartments, is parking requirements. And I forget the exact number, but I mean, if you have to build an underground parking unit or even off-street parking units, tens of thousands of dollars per unit, that drives up everything. And so if you can have a robust public transit system, you can have maybe more apartments on West Main Street and other areas where you don't need to have as much parking requirements, which can bring down rents and the cost of development.
Lloyd Snook?
Well, I caught a fair amount of flack at one point during the primary process as people took my answer of we should make sure we incorporate a meaningful bus service to mean I wanted to bus all the poor people to the county and forget about them, which is not at all what I've ever suggested. What I have suggested is that if you look at what is defining affordable has to include not only housing costs, rent costs, insurance costs, has to include the cost of getting to your job. It has to include, because what's affordable,
Totally.
If you live 10 miles outside of town, but you can take a bus in, you're now affordable, as opposed to having to live in town where it may cost you $200 more a month for your rent, but you can walk to work. So it's a package deal. You can't isolate them. This is also, it's important to note, an area-wide problem. Charlottesville could build the 3,000 more units or whatever that they say we need, but if Albemarle is still 10,000 units down, that just means we're not going to solve the problem, and it's going to cause dislocations that way. So we have to see it as a regional problem. If we see it as a regional problem with regional bus service as part of the solution, we can get there.
So there's the drive until you qualify phenomenon, which I grew up in Nelson County, went to Charlottesville for school, went to, my mom worked, we did everything in Charlottesville. And as gas prices, of course, my mom still lives out in Nelson, she only comes in when she has to. A robust transportation, we need to have a transit system, and this just means that we have to make the commitment to it being robust and losing money. Mass transit loses money.
It's a utility.
Exactly. And we can't expect it to pay for itself. It's never going to happen. It doesn't happen anywhere. So not only, but we also need to make sure that we're making this so that you can ride it late at night when you're getting off a job that gets off work at 3 o'clock in the morning.
And feel safe.
Yes. When I worked downtown, and I don't live a huge amount of time from downtown. I only live 7 or 8 blocks from downtown probably. But getting home, getting off at work 11, 12 o'clock at night, I just didn't feel safe as a woman walking home alone. And there was no bus that went by my house. There's no bus that comes down into my community, really. And there's no bus after certain hours that go up to Pantops. How many restaurants do we have in this town? A lot of restaurants close at 2 o'clock in the morning. I don't know of any bus services that are going on at 2 o'clock in the morning. So there's a lot of restaurant workers who would happily take the bus. There's also people who are utilizing those restaurant services until 2 o'clock in the morning, who, if they didn't take their car with them, would be safer for our entire population.
Who ought to be riding the bus? Thank
Exactly.
you very much.
So I almost think it's part of a healthy urban environment having a robust transit system, one that is on time, and that might mean that we have to start looking at designated lanes for transit at certain times of day. Like Richmond had the middle lanes that at rush hour times, those were only for their transit, so that people actually can get to and from work and appointments on time regularly.
I'm going to have to bring out the buzzer over here.
I'm actually going to talk too much because I really like mass transit.
I really do like you a lot, and I don't want to do it, Sena.
Well, you're a Jersey girl, so
No, I'm from Birmingham. I'm a combination girl.
I got it. So bullet point number 4 on Friday was transit. And regional transit was the bullet point number 4 on Friday that everybody coalesced on, the raise up into it. And we started this conversation about talking about what would contribute to a healthy housing system, and transportation is probably the second bullet point under cleaning up red tape to create a healthy housing system. Any other further questions?
Yes, we have a lot of questions coming in. The relationship
We're going to use the buzzer, though, on this one.
Yeah, we'll go 30 seconds. The relationship between Albemarle County and the city of Charlottesville will help improve affordable housing in Central Virginia in totality. A microcosm of this, I would say the relationship is uneasy at best. Supervisor Rick Randolph, when the courts were announced staying in downtown Charlottesville, which was a no-brainer, he said on the record, the city of Charlottesville has a long history of not keeping its promises with Albemarle County. He wants to make sure that Albemarle County and city of Charlottesville can have an agreement and that the city will keep its promises. Open-ended question. Michael Payne, your turn to go first here. The relationship between Albemarle County and the city of Charlottesville and how it impacts affordable housing and a healthy housing system.
I think Albemarle and Charlottesville are one community. I grew up in Albemarle County, graduated from Albemarle High School, but was always in Charlottesville, worked in Charlottesville, considered it, my city, and a lot of workers and families. It's the same thing, and it doesn't matter if someone works in the city and lives in the county and drives in every day who technically made a decision. It all impacts their day-to-day life. So I think historically there's been some political games played on both ends by City Council and Albemarle County playing off each other. We have to view Albemarle County as a collaborator and work closely with their Board of Supervisor and their city staff to figure out how can we work together on climate change, housing, public transit. I think the county is starting to do some really exciting things in the urban ring, and we can continue to expand that partnership.
Lloyd Snook.
Well, first of all, I have quoted Rick Randolph a number of times during this campaign when he said that the city has not been a reliable negotiating partner. I would add, for those with a long memory, the county hasn't always been a reliable negotiating partner either. If it had been, we would have had a western bypass built 40 years ago. We spent the last 45 years playing a giant game of chicken of who's going to build the western bypass or the Meadow Creek Parkway first. So it's not one-sided, but I will say, I think we've got an opportunity now, at least listening to the rhetoric coming from all of the right people, that I think that the city people who are running for office, the county people who are running for office, and most importantly, the University of Virginia, all seem to be talking about the same issues as regional problems. They seem to be talking about regional housing issues, regional transportation issues, and if we can get all of us together and give meaning to the notion of the joint planning effort that technically exists on the books but hasn't been used very effectively, that's what we need to move forward with.
So I concur with all that, but however, I'm just going to add a little bit with that I grew up in Nelson, as I said before. We used Charlottesville for everything. I always said I was from Charlottesville because whenever I traveled or anything, that's all. as soon as I turned 18, I moved into Charlottesville. It was actually Albemarle County. I didn't know that.
Right, no one
I
knows.
moved into
Right.
Charlottesville.
Right.
I moved across the line, never knew until Election Day where it was that I actually lived. And the other just piece to this is I'm cautious about giving my word, because once I give my word on something, I intend to stick to it, unless I find a really good justification to back away from that. So if I make a promise to be working with Albemarle County on a project, I'm going to stick with it unless I find something that's really not okay. I was going to use the word kosher, just because. Yeah,
kosher.
You know, as long as I find it's got to be pretty serious to make me back down.
We had
from
Mayor
my
Walker
already.
on the I Love CVille show, and Mayor Walker said on the I Love CVille show, this was probably 3 or 4 months ago, that she had yet to have a one-on-one conversation with a board of supervisor. And that terrified me. That absolutely terrified me. Keith, jump in the mix here.
So at least you didn't call me a schmuck. So
We're
thank
not
you.
there yet.
We're not there. Give me a little bit.
She doesn't know you well enough.
Oh, I think we're getting there.
Lloyd Snook.
Stop convincing.
We're getting there. And I'm just wondering why the mental health professional was put next to me. Just saying. So
That was funny. That was funny, Keith.
I'm trying to interject a
good.
little bit of humor into a pretty serious subject. So this is exciting about this regional discussion. As you know, I chair the Regional Housing Partnership. I made a motion 2 years ago to create that. We have third in charge at UVA at the table. We have all the elected officials at the table. And one of the things I say consistently in our executive meetings, it takes teamwork to make the dream work. I know it's a little bit corny, but it's true. And they're all public meetings. I would hope the three of you guys show up.
Who was at the meeting on Friday? We just got a question about that. It was Heather, right?
Heather Hill was
Yeah.
there.
Sarah Hill Buchensky asked
Yeah,
that question.
Heather Hill was there. Yeah, it was an awesome thing. It was an awesome thing to see Heather Hill and Jesse Roth. Oh God, I forgot Jesse's last name. Nelson County Board of Supervisors. He's going to shoot me. Having a 15-minute sidebar conversation about the impacts of affordable housing on a rural jurisdiction versus an urban jurisdiction, because I 100% agree with Lloyd. We are urban, flat out urban. We are not a suburban city at all. So anyway, I'm over my 30 seconds. But any more questions?
Yeah,
before-
yeah. We have a ton of questions.
When's the
coming in.
next meeting?
You would ask that question.
Yeah.
I would ask that question.
Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission's website. I will get you the link. I'm the chair. I should know it. But if Christine Jacobs is watching, she'll chime in with the date and time.
Next question is coming in, and this is a very good one. What's UVA's role in the ecosystem of creating a healthy housing system and affordable housing? Couple background points on this. And Sena, I'm going to start with you on this one right here. So Jim Ryan, new president, has aspirations potentially of taking all second years and keeping them in university housing in the next few years. I play racquetball with the CEO of MSC. He is one of the largest landlords, his company, in the city of Charlottesville. This, I'm going to cut to the chase, terrifies a lot of landlords, having second years on grounds at UVA housing. What is UVA's role in the affordable housing crisis? And the second part of the question is, if second years are on grounds, how is that going to impact the city of Charlottesville's housing ecosystem?
Well, one of the pieces is that obviously taking out second-year students, if this happens, will bring some of the pricing probably down. But you've got to remember, a lot of students are 3 and 4 students per a unit. So that's not always, it's not going to necessarily translate to the amount of units that are still going to be needed within the next couple of years to house our population. I think it might bring some of the rental prices down a little bit for a while, but historically, Charlottesville has always been in demand for housing. I can't remember a time when there was a glut of housing in the city. even during some of our biggest economic bubbles of bursting, Charlottesville housing prices might have gone down some, but not like compared to the rest of the country. The other thing, as far as UVA's role in this, is becoming a good transit partner. It hasn't been in their best interest in the past to do so. I think our new UVA president is looking beyond just the economic interests, but I think he's also addressing more of a social interest and a good partnership interest with Charlottesville. And I think what I'm seeing is we kind of have a really good place to start from in working with the university as a true partner versus 3 separate silos of Albemarle, Charlottesville, and the university. I feel from them, I have a lot of hope that we can move forward. And the fact that Jim Ryan even put forward this community group to talk about what are the impacts, I think is an incredible step and gives me true hope that this is going to be solved.
He says it's a reflection of the UVA students migrating to West Main and the towers on West Main because their parents can afford it, and students that don't come from money at UVA migrating to other sections. I stayed in Lambeth my second year by former Payne and Sena Buffet. We didn't have a ton of money. Where I'm going with this is he wants to correct basically that cafeteria mentality. Wealthy, rich kids sit here, poor kids sit over here. Lloyd Snook.
Well, and the other thing that happens, of course, is that in many instances, the fraternities who rely on the second-year students for the folks who are going to live there create their own islands of wealth in many instances. But historically, again, going back to the Stone Age days, the 1980s, when we were grappling with this question about the university student housing, we were trying to get the university to agree to house more students, and they had 47 reasons. They always had a reason why they couldn't do whatever it was they wanted us to do. But the reason that stuck with me was they didn't want to be in the position of trying to taking the economic risk of trying to figure out what 19-year-olds wanted. Because one year it might be everybody wants to be in singles, and the next year everybody wants to be in suites. And if they've built the wrong thing, then they're at a competitive disadvantage. And the universities, and I think that's a perfectly valid reason why they might say, we don't want to be in that business. However, supposing they were to say, we've got some land here where we would like to have housing built, we'll give this developer a ground lease, a 99-year lease. Do whatever you want on that ground lease, provided that you provide X number of housing units, or however you want to say. But let them do what they do. Let them take that risk if that's what they're into, and let them make the decisions, and they can react a lot faster and a lot more agilely than the university can, given all of the constraints that the university has with how it spends its money. So there may be a way to accommodate both the legitimate risk fear that the university has, but still be able to provide more housing for students.
Nita Knight says it seems we are catering to the whims of the top 1% with amenities and apartments on West Main that only the wealthy UVA students can afford. Michael Payne, anywhere you want to go.
Well, I think some of, as others have mentioned, some of the areas where UVA can help in housing is supporting transit, and ideally, being part of a regional transit authority, which I think UVA is, starting to be a partner in the regional transit partnership and other things. Increasing wages, which, UVA has started to take action on, and expanding that into increasing wages for all contractor employees as well. I'm thinking of Duke University and other universities which have partnered with the community to build workforce housing for employees. I think in the case of Duke University, they actually partnered with Durham's local community land trust to build workforce housing. So those kind of creative partnerships. In terms of requiring second-year students to live on grounds, it could be a positive thing in terms of it could help relieve pressure on our housing stock and families houses that families could live in could be open to families who live in the community rather than students. However, I don't think it's inevitable that it's done in a good way. I mean, you could imagine a scenario where UVA says we're going to require it and build new student housing, but we're going to buy land in the city and build student housing. And in that case, you're removing land from the city. And there's this elephant in the room of the fact that UVA pays no property taxes. So on any properties that it's building, the city's not getting any revenue from it. And so there's sort of a cost-benefit analysis to look at in terms of I think it's only positive if the city or if UVA is building on land it already owns on. But if it's going out and acquiring more land, I think it complicates the picture of what the total impact could be.
So I have some good news to report on this subject matter. There's hope. So Colette Sheehy asked me to put a blue ribbon panel together from the Regional Housing Partnership. We've had one meeting already that included PHA, Sunshine from PHA, Dan from Habitat. We had Chip Boyles. We had Greg Slater from the Land Trust. We had private developers, and this was all under the directive of President Ryan to start working on again, coining this term, healthy housing system, how UVA can do it. I can tell you I've been on the commission for 10 years. It's taken 10 years of phone calls and coffees and handshaking to get UVA at the table to have this discussion. And we are having it. They are very mindful and very thoughtful about all the subjects that we just outlined here. So I will offline be more than happy to keep everybody posted on those discussions. But what the walk away here is they've engaged us, and that's the reason why I'm most excited about this regional housing partnership. It really brings some pretty smart people to the table. Me not being one of them, I'm just putting everybody in a room and sit back and relax. Any other questions?
Tons of questions. Joffrey Woodruff, Center of Developing Entrepreneurs. Gentleman is in the building, the Enterprise building right across the street from where we're at here in the Macklin building. He's revitalizing isn't in the right word. He destroyed the Charlottesville Ice Park. He's building it from scratch to be a hub or an epicenter for essentially his portfolio of investments. He also kicked, $125 million to the University of Virginia for a data science school. What he's essentially doing is creating a farm system, a data science school, a AAA affiliate for his hedge fund, if you may, where he uses data science to drive ROI for his investors. Code is going to be a portfolio for his assets. What is going to end up happening, I think this is safe to say, is you're going to have an epicenter that is going to create a ton more wealth in the community. This wealth is then going to need somewhere to stay. It's going to buy up whatever housing it is. It's going to drive up the cost of living for everybody, and it's going to create Charlottesville into being more potentially into this bastion or paradise or playground of one percenters, of wealthy folks. What do we see the impact of? Who goes first here? Lloyd, you go first this time. What do we see the impact of Code, Joffrey Woodruff, and his inventors? He's a capitalist. He's not doing anything wrong. I'm not knocking him. He's a businessman that's trying to drive return on investment for his partners.
Well, and there are two takeaways that I have dealing with Mr. Woodruff. I've never met the man, hope to soon. But the first is, it's striking to me that he's got a vision. He's got a plan. But the city doesn't.
They do not. Yeah.
We don't have,
right.
There is nobody in City Hall whose job it is to look more than about 2 years down the road.
Past this.
Yeah. And so the first thing we need to do is we need to have a focus on, just like the university's got a plan. They may deny it. They won't share it with us, but they've got a plan. Woodruff's got at least a vision. We need something comparable if we're going to play in that game, and we need to play in that game.
What is the plan then? What should it be?
Well, what I was going to say is, his vision is he wants downtown Charlottesville, as he says, to be like downtown Palo Alto, where the great minds, the captains of industry, whatever, can walk out onto the downtown mall, meet each other for coffee, solve a problem on the back of a napkin sitting in the coffee shop. And
those are almost his exact words.
Right, and talking about the synergies of having a lot of smart people in the same place at the same time. That's great, but if you've ever been to Palo Alto, two things you got to know. First of all, Palo Alto now is unlike Palo Alto 40 years ago when I was out there in school. Palo Alto now is a lot of tall buildings and a lot of glass and steel. The second thing, though, is for every Palo Alto, there's an East Palo Alto. And East Palo Alto is the place where it's technically a different city. It's technically a different political subdivision, but that's where the poor people are. And until recently, they had a lot of unpaved streets there. It was such a dichotomy on either side of US 101. We don't even have the luxury of a US 101 separating us in that respect. And so the people at Friendship Court, for example, or South First Street will see the downtown mall as not just something in the distance, but as a part of their lives and what they walk past every day. And if they don't feel like the downtown mall is a place that is welcoming to them, this is a sociological problem, not an economic problem. It's a sociological problem, but it's an important one. And I think we need to make sure that we work with Woodruff and his energy and his money, frankly, to try to direct the development in such a way that it's not exclusionary.
Michael Payne, I'm curious of your thoughts on this.
Yeah, and I have met with Jaffrey Woodruff and had a long conversation with him, and I certainly think that his intentions are to try and do something that's positive for the community. I think the danger is that, well, one is just look at the impact of the project already in terms of, yes, there's by right development and these things, certainly are allowed to happen. But
loss of the ante room, loss of Escafé.
Right, you have the loss of the ante room, which was really the only regular venue for rap and hip hop concerts in Charlottesville. You have the loss of Escafé, which was a community space for the LGBTIQ community in Charlottesville. So when we have these conversations about, who finds the downtown mall to be a welcoming place, who goes there, it's those kind of things that play into that story. So there's that immediate impact, and then there's that longer term impact of, I think there are people who have a vision of turning Charlottesville into a small town version of San Francisco or Seattle in terms of being a hub of the tech industry. And I think there's a lot of people who have been working in those industries who find those areas so expensive that they look at Charlottesville and they see our housing crisis and they think, well, actually compared to San Francisco or Seattle, this is cheap. Well, I want to go here instead. And so,
which is ridiculous because the salaries don't match.
Right. And so you have, not just the Code Building, but Willow Tree and what's happening at UVA. And the city does actually have a tech innovation district, which is a very informal and not very, strict planning thing. But they have a tech innovation district that's been proposed that would span, I believe, from around where the Code Building is up to Dairy Central. Right. And so there is this vision of, more intensive commercial development, particularly around the tech industry. And again, we see experience from other cities is that this does not automatically trickle down to benefit the entire community. If you don't plan for it, it can increase rents and land prices, which brings in more speculative investment, which further increases land prices. You bring in people who are much wealthier and have more, have higher salaries who buy up the housing stock, and it pushes out working families who have lived here for generations into surrounding counties who will still work in the city. They will be the people working at UVA, working in the service sector, working as nurses and providing the Ubers and Lyfts and all the services for the wealthy tech people, but they can't live in the city anymore. They drive 30, 40 minutes in. And so we just have to be intentional about strategies for community wealth building, which is not just a catchphrase. It's something, there's a Community Wealth Institute. Cities across the country have done it in terms of how can you use, again, community land trusts, community development corporations, local financial institutions to capture increased economic growth and keep that wealth as much as possible within a local community so it's not just the 1% benefiting.
Sena.
We don't want to be Palo Alto. I don't want to live in a city that's like Palo Alto. I want to live in a city that has a good mixture of race, ethnicity, diversity. Diversity makes it a much better place to live overall. So we need to be making sure we're engaging people like Mr. Woodruff into coming and what the true impact is going to be, and thinking through that and working with him, encouraging him hopefully to say, maybe work within our economic development department to try to give people a chance to intern at Code where we can, and having set amounts of internships possibly, these are just where we can actually start bringing in, because not only do we face an affordable housing crisis in Charlottesville, we also face, and across the country, we're looking at how the living wage has not kept up with minimum wage. And somebody recently did a study I was reading about where if the minimum wage had stayed up with where it was in the 40s when it was first started, we would be making close to $32 an hour now, or $40 an hour now, instead of, was it $8.75 or $7.25? $7.25. Okay.
$7.25 in Charlottesville?
Everywhere.
Yeah, everywhere
it's
in
national.
Virginia.
Really?
That's the national rate.
There are some localities in some states that have caused it to be higher, but nationally
Right.
7.25.
So encouraging things like the living wage campaign that is putting social pressure and giving people a sign that they can stick up saying, I'm paying $15 an hour. Regretfully, if you look at Charlottesville's cost of living, living wage is really closer to $25 an hour. But if we can also look at things like it's not going to be so much with code, because I'm sure they'll be able to offer their employees health insurance, but if we can look into interesting ways to look at health insurance by combining smaller businesses together to be a cooperative or something where they can purchase a large health insurance together. We have to look at the socioeconomic impact and how not only is a big company in the tech industry coming in, bringing in revenue for the city, but we need to designate that revenue now to being how we are going to help the rest of our city rise up to meet and take part of that and benefit from that as well, instead of just becoming used by that.
Keith?
Great conversation.
Yeah.
Good stuff. I'm the oldest of 5. My family is multiracial, multi-ethnic. I have 2 African-American brother-in-laws. I have multiple Latino sister-in-laws. I have some Jewish family members, some Catholics. I've got to have a few of them. And I just came back from Seattle for a week. And our youngest daughter lives there. And I have to tell you, it was obscene how lack of the diversity that town had. Because I have a multiracial family, I was the most black person there. I didn't see an African American. I didn't see a Latino. And I just looked around and went, wow. So to match Sena's comment, personally, I think our town is pretty diverse. From an ethnicity perspective, I would never want to see it go to the way of Seattle. That's my personal opinion, for what it's worth. But I wrote a list of rapid-fire questions to talk about, kind of get away from Michael smiling, because he knows what's coming.
Do you know what's coming, Michael?
He knows what's coming.
I don't know what's coming.
Neither do I.
That's why I'm worried.
But it was funny. I was listening to Lloyd, and one of the questions I wrote to ask the 3 of you guys is, do you think in years or decades? And you answered that question, Lloyd. You think in decades. And that's the right answer. You can't think in 1 year or 2 years. Those are things you need to fix today. But to solve these problems, you need to be thinking in decades. So my hat's off to you, you hit that question spot on. So anyway, that was way beyond my 30 seconds.
And I'll add, with climate change, we probably need to be thinking in centuries.
Minutes. It's funny you should say that.
Other way around.
Today is the 2-year anniversary of Irma. My wife and I spend about a month every year down in St. Martin, and 2 years ago, 85% of it was wiped out. We go back every year, help rebuild every year. They're only up to 40%. I mean, it was wiped off the face of the earth, literally.
One of the things that has come up, and we have 15 minutes left, and I have a number of rapid-fire questions coming in. We got a lot of DMs and questions coming in as well. Bob Gibson is watching, the esteemed journalist. He's got questions for us. We've touched on this briefly. If the downtown mall, 42%, recent survey, 42% of African Americans don't feel welcome or comfortable in the downtown mall. right? We go downtown on a Thursday, Friday, or Saturday night. I'm on the downtown mall all the time. Downtown mall seems to be a fairly white place. I think that's safe to say. If we don't have the dining and culture and art and music venues that are diverse and welcoming of African Americans, folks that are Hispanic, that is going to directly impact affordable housing in our community, unquestionably. You've touched on this briefly here. Maybe more of a direct question and topic to this. Do you want to start with this one, Sena?
No?
Do you want to start with this one, Michael? Because
Sure.
you touched on this already.
Sure. In a rapid fire way, I think part of it comes down to ownership. Who owns businesses, who owns land, who owns housing, and how many businesses on the downtown mall are minority-owned businesses or black-owned businesses. There are a few, but it's predominantly white-owned businesses. And even if it's not intentional, when that's the case, a lot of times it means cultural institutions that cater to the cultural preferences of wealthy white residents in terms of not just prices, but things that are being offered. And so I think we need to find ways to, not just in the downtown mall, but throughout the city, expand ownership of restaurants.
But how do you do that?
Venues.
Tangible production.
I think part of it, is when you look at new commercial developments like, for example, Dairy Central, which I think has done some good work to this end. If you have new commercial development coming in that's going to have commercial space, trying to partner with developers to figure out, we have tons of entrepreneurs in the city. A lot of times it's just a challenge of finding a commercial space to match up with the product or services that they're offering. So figuring out how to, partner with the community to figure out, we have this commercial space coming on. Is there an existing business that we could give preference? An example with Dairy Central is, like Angelic's Kitchen moving in. I mean, you could envision a scenario where a developer said, I'll just have a chain restaurant come in instead. Again, trying to partner in as many ways as possible to do that kind of thing. And I say it over and over again so much it sounds like a buzzword, but it's not. Community wealth building, community development corporations, land trusts, local financial institutions. Cities across the country have used those networks of institutions to help spread ownership and wealth building opportunities to people who live in the community, not just people who are already wealthy and already have access to capital.
What are you thinking, Lloyd Snook?
Well, the first thing I kind of come back to, let's be clear on what the city can do, what it can order, which is frankly very little,
Sure.
versus what it can do with either by providing excuses or ways for people to get together, or by hosting conferences for networking opportunities and things like that. A lot of times people want the city council to get in there and pass a law that somehow is going to ordain that there be a wrap facility available on the downtown mall. We can't do that. So the issue becomes how do we get this kind of networking thing going on? I've talked to a number of people about trying to figure out how the city, for example, might be able to encourage, particularly after the flap over the last month or so, what can we do to encourage the sense that rappers are just as welcome as folk artists on the downtown
You're talking
mall?
Tanisha Hudson's Unity Days concert.
Hudson, Wale,
Yeah.
and there were other. I mean, Ty Cooper is another person I've talked to about some of this stuff.
You said his name correctly. I was impressed with that, Lloyd Snook. Wale. Nicely done.
Oh, hey, I'm a hip kind of guy.
Okay, Lloyd
But
Snook.
anyway, the point is
Michael.
that there are discussions we need to be having about this sort of networking opportunity. That's where we're going to be able to make some progress. It's not going to come because council passes a law.
Thank you for giving me a chance to get my head wrapped. As you know, I've been an entrepreneur. I've kept a small business enterprise going at various points. The Community Investment Collaborative.
Nice.
Expanding that program, they do an amazing job in teaching people both how to start up and maintain their own entrepreneurship business. I cannot say enough for that program. I love that they have also been recently engaging with the Department of Economic Development office here in Charlottesville for the Minority Business Grant.
Holly Lee.
And I think because business loans are difficult to get. So making a loan program, a business program designed for encouraging minority businesses, and also, again, making sure it's out there. It's One thing I have found over the last couple of years is getting the information out can be difficult because people aren't watching television that much anymore. So you can't do commercials. After a while, you tend to get on the bill payment program at the city, so you never open your utility bill anymore because you're paying $80 a month or $20 a month or whatever. You're paying the same amount every month, so you don't need to see it. You start paying attention more to social media, but then you flip-flop between Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat or whatever. So finding the way to inform people is becoming more and more difficult. And so that's got to be addressed. How do we actually get that information out there? And in some ways, it means getting back to get a bunch of high school kids, hire them as interns, and go knock on doors and actually make sure we're knocking on doors, leaving information for people. Then I would also say Ty Cooper has had an amazing idea for a grant program to bring in, just even like a $50,000 a year grant program, to encourage minority entertainment, like the comedy tour or the STEP program or the Vibe Festival, so that we start bringing in and encouraging and paying minority entertainment.
So you know I'm going to step into this. Simplest way to get the word out, come on this show. We reach 250,000 people, right?
A month.
A month.
Yeah, I Love CVille. Unique IPs.
And we will bring you guys back on to help you get your word out. To go back to what Michael said, everybody who watches this knows I'm a Marine. So, our ethos, lead, follow, or get the hell out of the way. August 13th, 2017, I grabbed the hand of my African-American brother-in-law and walked up and down the mall consistently and held our hand. And we wanted everybody to see us holding our hands. So get out there, do. You guys are doing a great job. Are we going to do some rapid fire questions?
Yeah, let's
Are
do it.
we running out
We
of
got
time?
9 minutes, guys.
We got 9 minutes.
Let's make it rapid.
Rapid.
Michael,
You want?
you know what? I'm going to bust out the, should I bust out the buzzer? What do you feel about the buzzer here? Is it
Why don't
this,
you start?
remember that noise? The buzzer?
Why don't you start off?
Calling it.
All right, rapid fire right here. Why don't we start here with Lloyd Snook? Lloyd, what do you feel about the, how do you feel about the Lime and Bird scooters and how it's going to positively or negatively impact our community?
On the one hand, anything that gets cars off the road is a good thing. On the other hand, there's some practical problems, even simple things like where people leave them in the middle of the sidewalk that annoy the hell out of me. On balance, they're good. We've got to regulate them somehow to mitigate some of those effects.
Michael Payne.
I have never used one yet, and they do, I have to admit, they do annoy me sometimes in terms of both how much work they create for city staff for collection and how they're left in sidewalks to block, and it is a disability rights issue. It blocks people who might be on wheelchairs or other things from walking on sidewalks. But on balance, they are good. I mean, they're a good transportation option, reduce car trips, so concur. There's some small things we can improve, but on balance, they're good to have.
Sena Magill.
As a parent, I wish they would have helmets attached to them somehow.
Well, you can't get helmets.
Like attached to them
No.
at the time when you go to pick them up.
Right,
I'm
they
just
don't
like
have
you
that.
could like
Yeah.
leave a helmet somehow. I do know that on balance, they are making the city money. They are reducing car traffic, and this has been shown. There's a study that they've already put together that shows that they actually are producing a net positive. Yes, we have to address where they're parking, but net positive is good.
I'm never going to take anything that's going to mess up this hair.
Hairsmith is
There
a,
you go. We
is a
haven't-
sponsor of this program.
we haven't
Hairsmith
done-
on Market Street.
We haven't done any shout-outs for that. So rapid fire, we'll start with Lloyd, and this gives me enough time to get this back. What's the best piece of advice you ever received?
Marry her.
There you go. Yeah. She's also his partner in business,
That's right.
not just in life.
40 years.
Good for you guys.
It was in social work. 1/3 of the people are helping themselves, and you just happen to be there. 1/3 of the people, you're actually, they're not at a place in their life right now where they want the help, and it's kind of being forced on them, and they're just not ready. And 1/3 of the people, you're actually going to be there for. And
I'm looking for advice.
And that was it. In social work, that was advice. That was like, because it means step back, don't take yourself too seriously, and let people follow what they know is right about themselves.
Michael?
It's never about you.
Outstanding.
Wow, to the point, Michael Payne. I like that. It's never about you.
Lloyd and I are spot on. Marry that woman before she gets away.
Yeah. Okay.
That was my father's advice.
There you go. Smart advice. So you're on a deserted island, and you're only allowed to bring one book with you. What would that book be, Michael?
Oh my God.
When's the last time you read a book?
It could be a title. It could be. You're allowed to bring an iPad with you. There you go.
I'd bring Catch-22. I've always
Got it. Lloyd?
I'm going to cheat a little bit. Lord of the Rings, it's a trilogy, but you can get a box set. It's like one.
Foxfire Compendium.
Me?
Tells you how to live.
Any book on survival would be mine.
Foxfire Compendium.
There you go. See?
It's all about.
Give me a high five.
Gil.
Mine was the Marine Corps manual on survival, but anyway.
I got a good question that's side of Charlottesville here. Bike lanes. How do we improve bike transportation to people riding bikes? If you don't have much money and you can get on a bike and you don't have to rely on a car, you can save more money. That's going to help you climb the ladder and get out of your tough economic situation. Lloyd Snook, bike lanes.
There are a limited number of streets where they work well right now, but it's the kind of thing where if you say, all right, this is a 50-year goal, every time we repave something, every time we redo a sidewalk, we create a little extra room for a bike lane, we can get there.
Michael Payne?
Yeah, I think, incorporate every time there's a VDOT project, repaving infrastructure project, incorporating bike lanes and incorporating best practice. The research shows the most effective bike lanes have physical barriers.
That's right. That's right.
Safety, safety, safety. Protected bike lanes, protected bike lanes. I want my kid to be able to ride on her bike. I want to ride on my bike without getting hit by a car.
I love it. I love it. Keith Smith.
Lloyd, how do you start your morning?
Well, assuming we get past the shower and breakfast,
Before that, you get out of bed, feet hit the floor. How do you start your day?
shower.
Ruminate.
Say that again? Ruminate. I like it. I like it.
Snooze. And then
Snooze button. Yeah, good
snooze,
for you.
and then getting my kid out the door. Have you packed your lunch? Have you done your homework? Why haven't you done your homework? You told me last night you'd done your homework.
I start my morning by looking at text messages from this guy who texts me at 5:45 in the morning.
That's happened to me once.
We had to put a no text
He
rule
had
into
one of
effect. I literally had to put a no text rule into effect until after 8:30. You got a 5:45 text?
You got,
around
you
there.
got earlier than that.
Were you like, what the hell's going on here?
So I look to my left and say, I love you. As soon as my eyes open up. You got anything else you want to shout out?
Loves it every time.
I thought you were
There you
talking
go.
about right now, and I was getting worried.
No, he's not saying that to us, 'cause that would be terrifying.
Well done.
My husband usually leaves the house by 5, so he's usually gone by the time I'm up.
look over and say, I love you.
He might. I'm asleep.
Why don't we close on this note here? You guys have been great sports. We filled 2 hours. I thoroughly enjoy your time. Saturday and this week in totality, you guys are working as a team. You're canvassing. You're knocking on doors. What do we expect from the weekend with the three of you guys together? And the second part of the question, do you guys ever get tired of each other? You spend quite a lot of time together. I would imagine it's only going to increase. You guys are undoubtedly the favorites to win 3 spots on council. You're running as a ticket here in a very democratic city. You want to handle that one first?
Sure. We have similar ideas, but we're also coming at them differently. So we have disagreements. I think we are doing a combination joint coordinated campaign, but also very much individual campaigns too, because we are very much individuals. So it's important. I don't know. We're respectful of each other, and respectful that we all have different opinions on some things, and we're trying to come to consensus as best as possible.
Michael Payne?
Yeah, continuing to run on the message and issues that, I've been talking about for years and put that forward. And after the primary, the Charlottesville Democratic Party comes together to support Democrats. And I think we're able to find, we have disagreements, we're able to have those disagreements respectfully and find out where do we agree. And I think there are some big areas on transportation, climate change, zoning, neighborhood development services, where we are ready on day one to take action that can make a positive impact on people's lives. As for do we ever get tired of each other, it's nothing personal. But after 15 plus forms, you get tired of the forms, not the people, because we all. So after all these, well, no, I think everyone would agree, because after all these forms, we repeat the same things over and over again. It's like I can almost predict the words that I'm going to say, that everyone's going to say.
So I'm trying to mix it up a little bit.
Yeah.
Lloyd Snook.
Well, as far as Saturday goes, I'm hoping that certainly the three of us, plus some number of people who will be joining us from the Consular Committee, will probably get 200 or 300, 400 doors knocked on and distributed, and literature distributed. I imagine that I'll go out on Sunday as well. We've kind of agreed that we will have some joint efforts, but we'll also have some individual efforts. Not because we're throwing bricks at each other behind the scenes, but just, I've still got a couple thousand of my own flyers that I have to do something with. So that's where we'll be headed.
You guys did a great job today. Keith?
So one of my questions are going to be is how are you guys going to collaborate with one another? And we just heard it. So thank you for answering the question without me asking it.
Well, and could I just
Sure.
thank you for the work you've done
Thank
with the
you.
Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission
Thank
and the
you.
Regional Housing Partnership, because it's truly, as someone who works in affordable housing and work on these issues, it has changed the conversation, and it is exactly where people have been saying we need to go for a while. So,
Blind squirrel gets a acorn every once in a while.
Is that the blind squirrel? Yeah, something like that. This is what we're going to do with this program, guys. They did phenomenal work. We're going to archive the show on ilovecville.com. We will archive the show on iTunes, on our podcast. We will syndicate the show for 30 days across our network, 17 Facebook pages, 17 Twitter accounts, third largest Instagram community in the area, and an email newsletter that reaches 108,000 inboxes. We will start that by close of business today. So if you want to hear this interview in totality, you can hear it on podcast, or you can watch it on ilovecville.com. It was fabulous. What we try to do with the platform is educate you with what's out there. A more educated marketplace, a more informed marketplace is a more empowered marketplace. Thank you for joining us. Enjoy the weekend. Take care. Good work. High five. Great. Lloyd, great. Thank you. Very good work. One more thing, the photo. We ended on time. I know you guys somewhere to
So
go.
do you like the coaches?
Because I was told it was 10 to 12.
So have you been to Pearlie's in Richmond?
Okay. Can we take a quick photo?